Hello and welcome to the third in our series of digital breakfasts presented by NHS Digital. On with the event. COVID-19 has resulted in a rapid increase in digitisation and has accelerated the uptake of new and existing technologies. We're going to hear how we kept the system safe during the pandemic, and our panel will then discuss ongoing cyber protection, key issues today and the direction for cyber over the coming years. I'd like to introduce our panelists and our speakers this morning. I'll let them introduce themselves. So first, Neil.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining us this morning. I'm Neil Bennett. I'm CISO at NHS Digital.
Thanks, Neil. And Daryl.
Good morning. My name is Daryl Kays. I'm one of the main leaders in the Cybersecurity Operations Centre in NHS Digital, working for Neil.
Thanks, Daryl. And Sarah. Sarah might be on mute. So, moving on to Phil Huggins. Phil's on mute.
Phil, unfortunately you were on mute. Would you be able just to reintroduce yourself for everybody?
Allow me to do that again, and that's money in the pot. Good morning, everybody. I'm Phil Huggins. I'm the National CISO for Health and Social Care based in NHS X.
Thanks, Phil. And last but not least, Karen.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Karen Dooley. I'm the Deputy Director for Cybersecurity at NHS X.
Thank you, Karen. So to lead us off, Neil's going to give us a quick introduction.
Thanks, Matt. So over the next 15 minutes or so, we'll just give you a little bit of background on NHS Digital, the data security centre within NHS Digital, how we work closely with NHS X and other partners across the system to keep our systems and services safe and secure, and then talk a little around our response to the pandemic, and then a bit of a focused slot on our Security Operations Centre, and then we'll move into the panel session and open up for your questions. So if we just move on to the next slide then. So I'm conscious that we have a quite a mixed audience this morning. So for any of you who don't know who NHS Digital are, we're essentially the national technology, digital and data delivery partner for the health and care system. So what that means in reality, moving on to the next slide, we have a number of roles, but the core pillars to the work that we do are designing and either building or procuring national systems and services to meet the needs of the health and care system. We then run those critical live services to underpin the delivery of health and care, and those systems and services cover things like infrastructure, so some of the core national infrastructure, through to clinician facing services, more recently a big focus on citizen facing services such as the NHS app, NHS UK and such like, and then we also have a good sized data arm to our business. In relation to the data, we collect and disseminate data from across the system. So we collect and we either do analysis on that data and publish that analysis, or we onwardly flow that data where we've got the appropriate agreements and assurances in place. And that's very much about ensuring that we can improve healthcare outcomes. But underpinning that, and also across the broader health and care system, we are the cybersecurity partner for the health and care system and health and care providers. So moving on to the next slide, in terms of what that means for us being the cybersecurity partner of the health and care system. So over the last 3 or 4 years, there's been a fairly significant level of investment and a significant cybersecurity program that's been running, and that's delivered a number of things that's enabled us to support the health and care system in a number of different ways. So one of the core things that we've delivered over the last few years is our national CSOC, and that is a centralised capability that enables us to provide protective monitoring across the system and enables us to better identify and respond to threats and vulnerabilities across the system. And as I said in the intro, there's a bit more of a focused slot on that later in this session. Also, as a part of our security operations offering, we triage vulnerabilities to identify those that are both sufficiently critical, but also particularly relevant to the NHS context. And where they meet the set of criteria, we then issue a national alert out across the health and care system, and that goes out with an amount of information about the vulnerability, but also some remediation guidance to support local organisations in remediating those vulnerabilities. And we track the progress of remediation in order to support reduction of risk across the broader system. We also have our data security protection toolkit, which enables the review and assessment of local organisations who handle patient data against various standards, and enables informs improvement activities off of the back of that. And a big part of what we do, we offer a number of centrally funded services out to the health and care system, such as next generation firewalls, vulnerability management services, and a range of training and awareness materials and activities that local organisations can make use of. And then there's various reviews that are available to local organisations, backup reviews, Active Directory reviews and such like, very much geared at supporting local organisations in identifying areas of weakness and then supporting them in improvement activities to address those weaknesses. And then the final pillar that we have there is our Cyber Associates Network. So this is a network, we've got over 1,500 members now, and that's security professionals from across the health and care system. And it's very much run kind of by the members, for the members, if you like, and it's geared at sharing knowledge and best practice across the system and getting those security professionals talking to each other to improve that collaboration and kind of cross-system engagement. So moving on to the next slide then. So obviously over the last 18 months or so, we've had a very significant focus on the pandemic. NHS Digital in the broader context were at the forefront of digital delivery to support the pandemic response, be that either a massive overnight upscaling of existing services or in building new services at a pace that's probably never been experienced before in order to support the response to the pandemic. So there's been a great deal of focus from within the Data Security Centre on ensuring that those services were delivered and operated securely, but in parallel, we've also had a significant amount of focus on supporting the broader system. So we fairly swiftly reprioritised many of our efforts in terms of the cybersecurity programme that was already in place to reach down and support local organisations, probably to a level that we've never done before. And that started, I guess, with being fairly quick out of the blocks with things like toolkits of awareness materials for remote working and such like in the early days of the pandemic, when there was that big shift to using digital channels and that big shift to remote working. So lots of awareness guidance materials and such like to support local organisations. We also delivered a focused on-site support programme. So that was through our technical remediation project. And we took the approach there of placing organisations into cohorts based on risk. So looking at factors such as the number of intensive care unit beds, how close they were to COVID hotspots, what we knew about their security posture, and then prioritised supporting those organisations with various reviews and on-site support to ensure that any risk of operational impact through a cyber event, given the significant operational pressure that those organisations were under, we could try to mitigate that as much as possible. There was also an increased level of collaboration between NHS Digital, NHS X and the National Cyber Security Centre. So that helped with both improving our threat intelligence and understanding the landscape, during the pandemic, but it also enabled us to make use of some of the broader NCSC offerings, such as the protective DNS service, and getting that rolled out to many organisations across the system. And we also supported organisations with things like our cyber incident response capability. So we took the decision to deploy some of those support offerings at a much lower threshold than we would have done previously, given the nature of the operational risks that organisations were trying to deal with at that point. So we also provided protective monitoring, a core thread of the activities during the pandemic, protective monitoring over the test and trace services, and more recently the vaccination services. And that was all done through our Security Operations Centre. So on that note, I will now hand you over to Daryl, who will provide a bit more detail on that area of the Data Security Centre and how we operate in that space.
Hello, thanks, Neil. Yeah, so I work in the Cybersecurity Operations Centre, known as the CSOC, which is based in Leeds. If you go to the next slide, please. What I thought I'd do is try and show the context of where the CSOC sits in the organisation. So NHS Digital, as part of its remit, it has a duty to help safeguard digital services. And part of that is protecting the confidential health information that's held and transmitted within our systems. And it's also to prevent nefarious disruption or disclosure that would negatively impact patients and their care. And within NHS Digital, the Data Security Centre, or the DSC, performs this duty. We get our commissions directly from Department of Health and Social Care, NHS England and NHS X. And then within the Data Security Centre, we have the Cybersecurity Operations Centre, the CSOC, which is the largest component of the CSOC, of the DSC, sorry, has about 70 people working for it. And it delivers operational security protection across the health and care system. But what does the CSOC actually do? So what I've done is I've split the kind of the things that we do into different phases of the work that we do. So we identify assets and threats that are of interest. We protect those assets from the threats that we identify. We detect those threats when they are attacking assets. And then when we find that, when we detect those threats, we respond to the attacks on the assets and we recover those assets from the attacks. So breaking each one of those down into a bit more detail, we're looking at the identification of assets and threats. The assets that we have, there are hundreds of NHS Digital external and internal services which are operating across the NHS and health and care services. It's a more extraordinary array of different services, and as they're also, since the pandemic, there have been dozens of independent COVID-19 test and trace and vaccination program systems that were stood up at short notice. There are also 1.5 million NHS computers which are using the internet. So those are some of the assets that we're interested in. Then the threat side of things, two of the main threats one main threat is malware, such as viruses, trojans and ransomware. This threat is always evolving and we have to be constantly watching out for the latest developments in that area. Another of the main threats we look at are software vulnerabilities in systems across the world. These are continually emerging. And the NHS employs an enormous array of different software and systems, so almost anything that we hear about might impact the NHS. And those threats we help disseminate and help other organisations identify those threats through our Cyber Alerts website on the NHS Digital website. And we also publish a cyber bulletin on a weekly basis, which goes to key stakeholders. Thank you. So looking at the protection of the assets from those threats, there are a couple of main things that we do. So we have a specialist security monitoring, Neil already alluded to this, which looks at those key assets and gets an enormous amount of log feeds in from those systems so that we can see the detail of everything that's happening in those systems. And those are from the internal and external services that NHS Digital run, and also from the pandemic response systems for the test and trace and the vaccination programme. There are also some specialist NHS-wide security protection that are in place, and we get a specialist security insight into what's happening in those systems. So all internet activity that is going through the NHS secure boundary, which is used by most systems and sites in the NHS. We can see all that activity, and there's about 2 billion internet events every day that we're seeing there. We also have Microsoft Defender for Endpoint, which is deployed across the NHS in the Windows agreement with Microsoft. So 1.5 million computers that I mentioned on the previous slide, those are enrolled and monitored in that Defender for Endpoint system. It used to be known as Advanced Threat Protection, or ATP. You might be more familiar with that phrase. And then NHS Mail, which is used by most people in the NHS as well. That includes advanced multi-layered security protection built into it. So those are the protections. And those protections give us ways of detecting the threats when they're attacking assets. So we have a suite of security rules and alerts for those logs that are feeding into the CSOC. There's currently more than 4 terabytes of data every day coming into the CSOC that we see firsthand, and there's also indirectly, there's probably a similar amount indirectly that we get access to, at least seeing some of the events that are happening. But the direct data is 4 terabytes or more coming in, and our suite of rules and alerts monitor those systems and identify things that are of concern from a security team. We also conduct threat hunting. So when we hear about new things to be concerned about, new indicators of compromise, or new types of attacks which the automated rules and alerts aren't already picking up on, we proactively discover new threats by delving into all that data and looking for things that even the most up-to-date malware detection and vulnerability detection systems can't actually see yet, because they take a few days before they pick up on these things. We also detect when NHS email passwords have been leaked onto the internet. They could be leaked on very public forums or very hidden dark web forums, but we find out about those where those passwords have been leaked and potentially swapped and passed on to people, and we make sure that those, where they have been compromised, that we get those reset and are no longer a threat to the NHS. In all these cases, the alerts that we receive are investigated and triaged by a team of expert cybersecurity analysts. And that's the bulk of the work that we do in the CSOC, is that investigation and triaging. It's a lot of work and effort to trawl through all these alerts and concerns and try and pick out what is actually an incident. And that we try to, importantly, try to exclude legitimate activity. That's what that work is trying to do. Make sure we can rule out things that are false positives. And when we identify something that is continually a false positive, we feed back into the rules and alerts and threat hunting to make sure that we regard that as always legitimate activity going forward. Thank you. So once an incident is actually identified, we get to the end of that triage and investigation. We identify something as an incident, then we want to respond to the attacks and recover the assets, recover from the attack on the assets. So the detected security instance, what we do is we inform the system if it's a particular system or a particular service being run in the NHS, or if it's an organisation across the NHS that's being hit, then we inform them of the security incident. We let them know what's going on, and we offer our support. Neil mentioned earlier that we have a system of alerting people when there's a particularly serious threat that has emerged, our national alerting service. This is known as a high severity alert. So when something really serious emerges that requires immediate remediation, then we kick into gear and contact key stakeholders straight away and seek a quick response to identify whether they're a risk in their organisation and their plans to resolve it. An example of these kind of things would be SolarWinds, a print nightmare. You may remember those. SolarWinds was about a year ago, and it was an organisation that had been infiltrated by an attacking group, and they'd implanted backdoors into their software so that wherever their software was installed in customer sites, they could access the systems. And then Print Nightmare was a Microsoft vulnerability earlier this year, whereby the print spooler could take advantage of its privileged access on its server and there were concerns that people could carefully craft something that could inject extra code and extra instructions into that service and take control of that server. And those kind of things, they represent such a serious threat that we contact our key stakeholders across the NHS. And those key stakeholders, we have a key set of contacts, a network of them across the health and care service, who we contact either for individual incidents or for those kind of high severity situations. And in all cases, we offer our support to those organisations, and also we offer support of security incidents that are reported to us by organisations. So other organisations identify their own security incidents, and we like to have them reported into NHS Digital, and then we can offer our expert advice and guidance on how to remediate and recover from those incidents. We provide that guidance, and we track to completion the incidents, so we make sure they're fully sorted out. And in exceptional cases where there's a real problem at a local site, then we can deploy cyber incident response and send experts in on the ground and help out that organisation. Thank you. So what I wanted to hear just with the final slide was just to try and show that was a run through of kind of like the way you start with lots of information and result in incidents being raised. I wanted to give an example of how that happens in an investigation. So this is some data from Secure Boundary, which is that internet gateway across the NHS, possibly one of the biggest gateways in the world. And in a sample month earlier this summer, there was a particular set of alerts that we were monitoring very carefully, and it resulted in, when we were looking at those alerts across the month, there were over 200,000 potentially malicious events that were identified that were of concern to us. And when those malicious events were compiled together, that resulted our system in identifying nearly 3,500 cyber alerts. So that's what our cyber analysts pick up on, those 3,500 cyber alerts, and then they need to analyse those and investigate them, join them up where they're duplicates, rule out the false positives, and then in the end that resulted in 110 security incidents across the month to those organisations. So that's kind of like the funnel of data that as I said earlier, there's about 2 billion events a day going through Secure Boundary, and of those, this selection resulted in 110 security incidents going across the NHS to resolve the concerns that we identified. Thank you very much. So that's it from me.
Thanks very much, everybody. So we're now going to move on to the panel discussion stage. First of all, let me say that the recording of this seminar is going to be published on the NHS Digital website after the event, so don't feel that you need to take loads of notes. And just before we kick off the panel discussion, in case anybody missed the introductions at the beginning of the session, we'll just go around once again and make sure that everybody can introduce themselves. So starting once again with Neil.
Good morning again. I'm Neil Bennett, CISO at NHS Digital.
And Daryl.
Hello, I'm Daryl Kays. I work in the Cybersecurity Operations Centre, working for Neil.
Okay, thank you. And Phil.
Good morning. My name is Phil Huggins. I'm the National CISO for Health and Social Care based in NHS X.
Karen.
Good morning, I'm Karen Dooley. I'm the Deputy Director for Cybersecurity, and I'm also based in NHS X.
Okay, and Sarah. Yeah.
Hi, Sarah Murphy, working in NHS Digital's Data Security Centre.
Thank you very much. So this session is going to be very much driven by questions. I've got a few commonly asked ones to lead off with, but if you want to ask us a question or ask the panel a question, the two speech bubbles in the top bar of Teams, you can put a question into the Q&A, and I'll be monitoring that and picking up common themes and asking them to the panel. So please feel free to start entering questions anytime. So to begin with, probably the most frequently asked question is, what's the split of responsibilities in cyber between NHS X and NHS Digital, and how do the two teams work together? So we'll begin with Karen on that one, if that's okay.
Yes, thank you, Matt. So we have very distinct and different roles around cybersecurity, but I think first maybe it's helpful to describe what NHS X is as well, alongside NHS Digital. So NHS X is effectively a joint unit between the Department of Health and Social Care. So it takes the kind of work towards ministers, parliamentary accountability, policy and strategy functions around cybersecurity within government across the NHS, and takes that alongside the executive management of the NHS that's driven through NHS England and NHS Improvement. So within the team that Phil and I lead over in NHS X, we set the policy and strategy, but we also do work throughout the system around engagement and ensuring that there is kind of compliance and that the right assurance is in place. Then our partners, NHS Digital, they're the technical authority for us around cybersecurity. They also, as you've heard, do a vast array of functions around security operations and support and services out to the sector. You touched on how it actually works. I would say sometimes I forget that we're two different organisations, because it's very rare. In fact, I'm not sure if there has been a day, certainly in the last couple of years, where I haven't been in sessions with NHS Digital. And I would say that often I see as much, if not more, of the NHS Digital teams as I do my own teams within NHS X. So we work in hand, but we're, to steal a phrase from the NHS, if you like, we're more of a multidisciplinary team. So we don't always agree on everything, but that's great, because what that does is it allows us to bring our different expertise and our different kind of hats to each problem, and then work through how we deal with those. And I think that works really, really well in practice. I think what makes it work really, really well is that it doesn't matter where we sit, we're all absolutely focused on what it is that we're trying to do, which is to protect the NHS and social care from cyber attacks. And I think without fail, every single person in both organisations is like so focused and passionate about achieving that aim. I think I've worked in a lot of places in my 30 years as a policy lead in government, and a lot of collaborative teams, and I'd say, you know, for me this is one of the most kind of unified that I've ever worked in. But it is that, you know, we all know what we're here to do, and we just work through how we get there in the best way.
Excellent, thanks Karen. And in the spirit of collaboration, Neil, do you have anything to add to that?
I think Karen's covered it very well. You know, our roles and responsibilities are clear. They are a different set of roles and responsibilities, but as Karen said, and particularly during the pandemic period, we couldn't have done what we've done and the level of support that we've provided across the system had we not been working as a single team. You know, the level of collaboration across NHSD, NHS X, and also the support from the National Cybersecurity Centre has just been phenomenal through that period. So very much a one-team approach, if you like, with that collaborative work and operating against a single mission.
Excellent. And sticking with you for the moment, Neil, what do you think is the greatest threat the NHS is facing currently in terms of cybersecurity?
So I think one of the main areas that we focused on, particularly through the pandemic and still today, is around ransomware. So it won't come as any surprise to anybody on the call that that's been a key area of focus for us. You will have seen a lot of the media coverage over the last 18 months or so, the uptick in ransomware attacks across the world, a focus on healthcare organisations. I did read a stat recently. I think it said that there was a 45% increase in attacks on healthcare organisations during the pandemic, period as compared to, I think it's 22% or 25% across other sectors. So healthcare organisations have been targeted to a greater extent during the pandemic period, and we have seen ransomware as a particular area of focus. So I guess we've responded to that in a number of different ways at different levels. So from a kind of technical perspective, very much kind of upscaling and increasing the level of onboard and bringing organisations onto some of the technical capabilities that we have to protect those organisations, but also a big push on awareness out to local organisations, improving the awareness, making individual users aware of how their actions can contribute to outcomes from a security perspective, how they can reduce the risk of attacks and ransomware attacks, but also very much supporting local organisations from the respond and recover perspective. So almost taking the view of, you know, given the scale of attacks around the world, if a local organisation was to be impacted by a successful ransomware attack, how effectively could they respond and recover from that attack? So supporting them with reviews of their backup provisions to ensure that they're aligned to best practice, the National Cybersecurity Centre guidelines, to ensure that they could recover their data in the event of a successful ransomware attack. So that's where one of the biggest threats and one of the key areas of focus during the pandemic for us in terms of support to local organisations.
Thanks very much, Neil. And Phil, maybe do you want to follow up on that with your view of the threats and then move on to the themes emerging from the strategy work that you're doing at the moment?
Sure. So I'd fully echo what Neil says. Actually, a large part of what I get on my knowledge of threat comes from the CSOC and their threat intelligence function, which is, in my experience, one of the better threat intelligence functions I've worked with. And so I would say he's hit the nail on the head there. I think it's worth bearing in mind the nature of health and social care. You know, we are talking about an enormous environment, you know, potentially 10% of UK GDP. So many organisations if you combined all of the organisations that we worry about, you're north of sort of 40,000 organisations across the UK. Some of them very, very small with very limited capabilities. Some of them much larger with better capabilities and the ability to protect themselves. So I think, you know, the threat is as it is. You know, when you have that many organisations connected to the internet, something such as ransomware, even untargeted, becomes a real problem. Because it's a numbers game at that point. We also have a new economic agenda here in the UK, so we are developing intellectual property and new businesses out of the back of a lot of the insight we get from NHS data, which will form the backbone of the sort of future UK economic platform. Some of those, especially some of the new intellectual property around artificial intelligence, are highly contested. So we do have some bits of the healthcare system which are pretty targeted, actually, and we need to spend some you know, extensive efforts on. But in general, I would say that it's the industrialized attacks that most concern me, because actually I've got a very broad remit to look after. In terms of themes going forward, I probably should talk a little bit about what I've discovered. I'm relatively new into role. I'm sort of 6 weeks in, I think, which allows me to still say it's not my fault yet, I think. What I would say is I have been meeting frontline organisations and central organisations. I am impressed, much more impressed than I was expecting to be, in where people are in terms of what the capabilities are and what's being delivered. I think there has been a huge amount of work post WannaCry, which we have to mention at least once. I would say a small mountain has been climbed since WannaCry. A huge amount of work done across the system. And a credit to everyone involved. I think what we probably have spent the last 4 years doing is responding to issues and probably being a little bit reactive. And that was, you know, we were put on the back heel by WannaCry. We've now got ourselves back onto our toes. So looking forward with the strategy, which is what I'm here to bring forward, is the sort of the next 3 to 5 years of what we're going to be doing. a lot more structured, a lot more proactive, a lot more addressing of risks before they become issues. One of the key pillars that I think is already in place, but actually we want to just emphasize that much more, is we are a system and we defend as one. Individual organizations are not on their own. We are better because of our visibility. We've already heard from Daryl about the scale of some of the services that are offered out from the centre, the visibility that gives us on the cybersecurity landscape and the threat landscape. That puts us in an incredible defensive position. You know, I am aware, I probably shouldn't say it, that we've stopped WannaCry-like attacks, or NHS Digital have, in their tracks, because they've seen it in one part of the system and have stopped it elsewhere. And I think that defend as one capability, deploying common tooling, visibility across everything we do is hugely important, and it is really a backbone of the strategy going forward. The other big piece I want to move us towards is we've probably spent the last 4 years since WannaCry, as I say, being a bit reactive, but focusing very much on cyber as a technology issue. I think for the NHS as a whole, cyber is a patient issue. This is about patient safety on the day, can they get safe treatment? It's also about patient outcomes. So if we do have a ransomware event, it does close a hospital for 6 weeks. What does that do to all the people who didn't get diagnosed or treated during that time? And I'm very keen that we talk about cyber as a patient issue, because we wouldn't, our clinicians are powerful people. They're brilliant people. They do a great piece of work under huge pressure. And the clinical safety officers, this emerging profession we have, are increasingly important in that. We wouldn't go into an operation not having cleaned our instruments. And yet sometimes we run our organizations without having cleaned our PCs. And I think we need to make cyber a patient safety and a patient outcome issue. I think that will, there's been great take up. We very rarely get much in the way of pushback from the front line, but just in terms of prioritization and understanding the effect we can have, I think that's going to be hugely important. And I'll just whistle through some top line points. Long-term workforce planning. Cyber is a very hard place to hire. We will never be able to pay as much as financial services will pay. They'll always have bigger, deeper pockets than we will. So we need to look at how we plan to support people in their careers in healthcare, understand that there's a mission and a purpose here that goes above and beyond the money, but also grow our own people. So that this is not something we can do with a yearly budget in a single organisation. It's something we have to do as a system. Our supply chain, we are a massive customer. No individual organisation within the NHS is a massive customer, but the NHS as a whole, huge. So our opportunity to positively influence our suppliers so that we can, apply a bit of leverage to one supplier and hit 100 trusts, that's enormous for us. And that's something we absolutely need to make more of. Also including, and I put our suppliers on some warning, buying things in a way that protects the public purse. I think Sir Simon Stevens said, think like a patient, act like a taxpayer. And I'm not at all opposed to that as an idea. And then the other thing is the great work that NHS Digital have been doing around central services out to the system. We're going to do more of it. There are more things we need to do, not necessarily the technical issue related things, but there are definitely more things we're going to be doing. The NHS Digital centralised services, there will be a wider variety of services available. And there will also be a wider variety of guidance from the centre. So we will help people head in the right direction and how they step up. And I'm going to stop there because I could keep going for the rest of the hour.
Thank you very much, Phil. Okay, so moving on to some of the questions that have been sent in by the audience at the moment. There's a question here about, do you patch vulnerabilities such as Office 365 centrally, or is that down to individual trust to implement? And I think sort of more widely the operating model between the centre and trusts. Daryl, is that something you want to comment on?
I'll give it a go. Yeah, the simple answer is that the Cybersecurity Centre and the Data Security Centre, we have oversight of the NHS, but we don't have direct ability to sort out the systems where they need patching or where there are vulnerabilities that need remediating in some form or other. Instead, we provide the advice and guidance across the NHS about how they should best do that.
Okay, thanks very much, Daryl. So apologies for the acronyms, which I don't know, but Do you still advise individual trusts and organisations to implement their own SIEM and internal-external SOCs on a local level? Neil, maybe you wanted to have a crack at that one.
Thanks, Matt. So very pertinent, actually, because we are currently looking at our SOC strategy and the future strategy for the Security Operations Centre. I'm very much looking at that from the perspective of local need, regional need and national need, and looking at a kind of multi-tenanted model so that the needs of local organisations, regions and the national level visibility can all be met. And that's very much geared around enabling local organisations to utilise a national capability should they wish, but if they want to implement a local SOC, then providing it meets the appropriate standards and shares the minimum data set with the national capability, so that we've got the broader visibility and Defenders One approach that Phil has touched upon, then that's the model that we're looking at. So it's very much a multi-tiered approach to meet that local need, regional need and national need. So there will be the national capability, but it doesn't remove that ability of local organisations to be able to do what they need to do at a local level or a regional level.
Thanks very much, Neil. I'm going to come to Karen for one that she might not be expecting. What is the approach to staff use of bring your own devices, personal devices in the NHS?
So that obviously was a huge change for us and for everyone across the NHS in a big spell swoop back at the start of COVID-19. So obviously bring your own device was used right across the NHS. NHS Digital, they are our technical authority, so they were very quick off the mark at the start of COVID in particular to update their guidance and to make sure that got out quickly to the NHS to remind people of the basics and also the security teams around some of the pitfalls of that and some of the things that they needed to look at. I don't know if NHS Data colleagues want to add, but I think, Neil, you touched on it as well in your presentation. It was one of the early things that you addressed.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I was just going to say it is, you know, the local organisations are empowered to make their own decisions around things like bring your own device policy. So it's a local policy. We support, from a national perspective, giving best practice guidance and various aspects like that, but it's local organisations will introduce their own policy and make their own decisions on things such as bring your own device, but we do encourage them to follow that kind of national guidance and best practice approach that we push out for them to make use of.
Thanks, Neil. And I'll come back to Karen with this one. It's how prepared to respond are we as a system for the next WannaCry scale incident? WannaCry scale incident, sorry. What lessons have been learned since 2017? Have there been national level exercises to help get the system fit to respond?
Okay, so WannaCry was my first day in this job because I volunteered, not a horrendous coincidence and set of bad luck. So yes, I've been around since then. Thinking back to WannaCry, the NHS was caught up in WannaCry by virtue of being collateral damage almost. So it just generally had relatively poor defences at the time. One of the key reasons it was so impacted was around patching in particular. So as Neil mentioned in his presentation at the start, that's one of the things that we now do very, very differently here in the NHS. And I've got much greater confidence that we would help us should another WannaCry event happen. So back in WannaCry, there was a patch available. It had been out about 5 weeks. The patch had been pushed out to the NHS, but what we didn't have at the time was a feedback loop to know whether or not the organisations had got the message about the patch and whether or not they were acting on it. So now we do things very differently. As Neil described, we push out the patch, we explain what organisations need to do, but we get that feedback loop. So within 48 hours, organisations have to tell us that they've received that message, and then they're very aggressively chased down when they don't. Likewise, within 14 days, a minimum of 14 days, they must tell us what they've then done to address that. And where they're struggling, that's where we and NHSD will intervene and try and look at what are the things preventing them, and are there systemic issues that then we need to go away and look at and do differently. So I think that's one of the main ways. We work very intensively with organisations to understand their position against unsupported systems. We're probably in a very enviable place across the public sector in our ability through NHS Digital SOC to see which organisations, for the vast majority of the NHS, where organisations are running older versions of Windows in particular. That allows us to understand which organisations are furthest away from being on a good footing around their Windows estate in particular, and to then again work with them closely to aggressively urge them to move on to supported systems, but also to try and understand what are some of the root causes, because for all organisations it's something they want to do, but sometimes there are very valid and difficult reasons why they're struggling to get there. So I think on those two things we've made great progress. The SOC obviously is it's hugely different to where it was back in WannaCry. It's expanded in scope, in sophistication, in its capabilities, and that that puts us in a great place. We've held 3 big national incident exercises. We've got an exercise plan in place for this year, and there are lots of local level exercises and regional exercises that are continually being run across the NHS. But as Phil says, there will always be a point at which you cannot fully defend the NHS from everything. So to us, and that becomes increasingly important now that the threat has shifted towards a more targeted threat. So it's no longer just in that WannaCry space where we might just get caught as collateral damage. There is definitely a shift towards cyber criminals in particular, looking at health services as an attractive target. So that means the bar that you have to reach to make sure that you can prevent an attack becomes higher. So we know that we need to focus very much about, well, someone will get hit, that is inevitable. We just need to make sure that the system can respond and recover as quickly and effectively as possible.
Thank you very much, Karen. A more strategic question perhaps for Phil. For cybersecurity compliance and assurance, what role and scope will NHS X and NHSD have with regard to the integrated care systems around the country?
That's a good question. The integrated care systems are coming together at the moment. The governance structures in general for integrated care systems are still, I think, being worked out, if I'm honest. What I will say is NHS X has recently published what good looks like for digital in the integrated care systems, and that has a large amount of cyber requirements identified within it. We see the ICS, the integrated care systems, the integrated care boards, as a really useful point of leverage, if I'm honest. There are a lot of organisations, as I said, if across health and social care, we're looking at north of 40,000 to 50,000 organisations. The integrated care systems will provide us with an opportunity to interact at a lower than regional level, but not at a 40 to 50,000 organisation level. So there's a real opportunity for us there. So yeah, we are setting some of the groundwork out around our expectations for ICSs, and the ICS structure will be absolutely sort of referenced in the national strategy that we'll be publishing early next year.
Thanks very much, Phil. Interesting question of the world of Internet of Things to a certain extent. Given the number of operational systems such as scanners and air conditioning, and now smart devices such as monitors within the NHS, can you explain how these are covered by security elements you've outlined? Now, is that a Neil or a Daryl? Who would like to take that one?
I can have a go at it to start with. So it's obviously a big problem that more and more things are connected to the internet when you look at it from the security standpoint. These things are controlled and installed locally. So it's our role in NHS Digital to provide the right advice and guidance about how they should be configured and to think about the configuration, not just install them with the default settings, but for organisations to consider the configuration when they install these systems and how they interact with other parts of their network. And it goes a little bit to the question that was asked earlier that I answered. We don't go in and change these things and set these things up ourselves. It's for the local sites to do that, and that's the right thing. The local sites don't want some strangers coming along and interfering with their setup. They're in charge of their local infrastructure. In fact, it'd be dangerous and to allow some strangers to do it. So it's our role to encourage and support the local sites in implementing these systems in a secure and measured way of sorting them out.
It's probably also worth, Matt, just augmenting that with we do recognise this as a significant and growing risk. So we do have some focused work. NHS X, ourselves in NHS D, MHRA and the National Cybersecurity Centre have a joint steering group looking at connected medical devices and what that means in terms of risk and how we best address that, both through the upcoming medical devices legislation that NHRA are leading on, but we also have a couple of underpinning working groups supporting that steering group, one which is made up of local organisations and one which is made up of organisations from the supply chain in the connected medical devices space. Very much to better understand the challenges in that space from the organisation user perspective, if you like, and also from the supplier community perspective, and bringing those views together so that we can look at a full life cycle approach, both from requirements into procurement, how suppliers are managing the security, ensuring that their medical device products are designed and delivered and operated on an ongoing basis in a secure fashion, and ensuring that there is that link up with local organisations and any changes that we may need to make in terms of procurement requirements, ongoing operational requirements, etc. So there's a full life cycle approach from that user community and supplier community, augmented by the legislation piece that MHRA are leading on. So a big area of focus.
If I could just add just one more thing. One of the key challenges is that the organisations across the NHS are of enormous variety of size and shape and experience. You have very large hospitals with extremely experienced IT technicians, and you get small medical centres with people that have very little IT knowledge. And we have to try and tailor everything that we do to encompass all of those organisations and levels of experience.
Okay, thanks very much, Daryl. I'm going to come back to Neil with the next one, but I think Phil might have things to say as well after Neil's spoken. So why do you think that cybersecurity for most organisations is kept in a separate siloed team rather than being embedded in multidisciplinary teams? And do you see that changing?
So I think that's probably a historic thing, and I've got a sunrise happening just outside of my window to the left. If I'm appearing half orange and squinting, apologies. But yeah, I think that's a historic thing, Matt, just from where many cybersecurity teams have grown out of. But do I see that changing? Yes, absolutely. And certainly within NHS Digital, we are moving to and have moved to, in many areas, much more of an embedded multidisciplinary team, getting the security, both the security knowledge and the security expertise embedded within delivery teams and working much more as an integrated team across the organisation rather than as a separate siloed organisation. And that's something that we do want to encourage across the system, and we can do that, case studies, kind of communication articulating changes that we've made, benefits that we've seen, and other organisations, and kind of articulating out the benefits that can be achieved by moving to that sort of model and how you can move to that model in a successful fashion.
Thanks, Neil. Phil, is that one of your strategic themes?
Yes. So, I mean, we will provide some guidance on how we think people might want to structure their cyber programs. It will be down to the local organisation to look at. I agree with Neil, it's a historic problem. We do have a set of sort of specialist niche skills in cyber, and there can be some value in co-locating those. I have to admit, the teams I've always been most successful with have had the customer at the front, and then what I tend to call business engagement. So where the people who go where decisions are made, because if security is not where the decisions are made, we're always just mopping up a mess. And those are your sort of security managers and your security architects looking at how things are run and how things change. I tend to think you still need specialist teams behind them who can go in and help on, you know, things like security testing and awareness and security risk assessment. And then there's infrastructure we run, which is security infrastructure, running a SOC, running a SIEM, running a bunch of the security controls. It would be great if we were in a world where we're all in rainbow teams and we're all there. We're not there yet. But I think the key thing at the moment for most security teams is to make sure you have a focus on where decisions are made. And as long as you are there, you know what's coming and you can influence it. If you're not there, then it'll always be done to you. And that's always been a historic problem with IT security.
Great. Thanks very much, Phil. And I think we're getting towards the end of the session, probably time for one last question, which seems like an appropriate one to ask at a webinar about cybersecurity. And I think various people might want to chip in on this one. What is your strategy for increasing cybersecurity awareness across all levels of the NHS? So I think I'll come to Karen first on that one.
So we're starting with the leaders, the key decision makers. So over the summer, I think post WannaCry, it was very much in everyone's mind across the NHS. Some big disaster happens, you know, it's on all the board agendas, and you know, certainly with COVID-19 in the last couple of years, there's no doubt that it's kind of slipped down the agenda. So the chief executive of NHS X and NHS D both teamed up together and delivered briefings right across the system this summer about the importance of cybersecurity, the increased threat, some of the key actions that organisations could take. But obviously it can't just be the leaders, it absolutely has to be everyone throughout the system. And you know, we through the NHS, everybody in the system had to do yearly annual awareness training around cybersecurity. One of the things that we're looking at is how effective really is that? Is it really effective to put someone through a once a year annual kind of training, and how best can we deliver that? And we're certainly open to hearing from others and the private sector and other organisations about, you know, what are the best approaches in that space. It feels like once a year is not the best way to do it. It certainly needs to be regular awareness raising. I know that NHS Digital last week, I think, released a revised version of their security awareness campaign that was pushed out across the NHS, and it's things like that little and often messaging, and that messaging in the context of what's important to the people that you're trying to get the message across to. So I see in the chat there are comments about how do we engage clinicians and get clinicians to do have the right behaviours, and you know, they all want what's best for their patients. So for some parts of the sector, it's about couching it in terms of, you know, what it means for patients and the people that we're caring for. And then, it's a huge topic, huge topic, the scope for using behavioural insights. I know it's something that Phil is incredibly passionate about, and one of the things he said on day one is, you know, we need to tackle the people aspect of this. So you will see a strong theme on people right throughout the forthcoming cyber strategy.
Thank you very much, Karen. I think that sounds like a subject we could return to for a further cyber breakfast in a month or two. So just remains for me now to say thank you to our presenters and panel members, and we hope that you who are attending have enjoyed this presentation. As we said, it will be available on the NHS Digital website if you have colleagues you think it might be interesting to share with or want to go back and have a look at. But once again, thank you all for spending some time with us.